And by doing so, we are rehabilitating the habitat, for the benefit of lechwes, for the benefit of cranes, for the benefit of other wetland biodiversity. And we need your help, we need your support to be able to continue this work for a long time to come. Thank you very much.
Vultures are, without a doubt, Africa's most effective scavengers. On the wing, they're highly mobile and often travel in large groups covering vast distances on their daily mission to find food. Vultures provide a remarkable ecosystem service. They effectively clear away carcasses across the landscape, and with this, are likely to reduce the spread and outbreak of disease. Alarmingly, these birds are amongst the most threatened on the planet. Across large portions of southern Africa, vulture populations are declining severely. Poisoning, in particular, is driving rapid population declines throughout their range. It is the very effective foraging behavior and feeding in large groups that makes vultures so vulnerable to poisoning, and hundreds of birds can be killed in a single poisoned carcass. Energy infrastructure also poses a threat to vultures, with birds regularly colliding with power lines and wind turbines, or being electrocuted on unsafe pylons. In many areas, they are also losing important breeding and foraging habitat. But there is hope. The Birds of Prey program have established a conservation project to address the major threats to vultures across the dynamic landscape of southern Africa. And this is achieved through the establishment of vulture safe zones, protecting habitat strongholds for vultures, and creating safe space for them to breed, forage, and thrive. Within each vulture safe zone, we're able to identify and mitigate the key threats to vultures. Working alongside a network of farmers, landowners, and communities, generating awareness and developing conservation interventions that work for them too. Importantly, within these zones we can closely monitor vulture populations and conduct research to guide our conservation activities and measure the impact of our work. By protecting vultures, we not only safeguard their important habitat and ensure the viability of populations to come, we also conserve a diversity of other wildlife, who all benefit from the establishment of vulture safe zones. Can you imagine an Africa without vultures? We cannot.
Conservation Science Unit is the Endangered Wildlife Trust scientific hub. We provide scientific support across the organization's programs and projects to ensure that our collective work is scientifically sound and evidence-based. One of the key strategies of the CSU is to identify and fill knowledge gaps that inform conservation decisions. One such project that falls under this strategy is the African Lion Database Project. In October 2018, we embarked on an exciting project on behalf of the IUCN Cat Specialist Group, on behalf of the broader conservation community, to create a database that consolidates lion population and distribution data from across the continent. In recent decades, there's been increasing concern over the fate of this iconic African species. In the last 25 years alone, Africa's lion population has halved, and it is estimated that there are only 23,000 lions left in the wild. Unfortunately, few lion populations across the continent have reliable estimates of population size or trends. Furthermore, data that have been collected tends to be siloed in various research and government institutions, and this contributes very little to conservation. A single database that consolidates population and distribution data for the species will be able to provide better conservation impact. Therefore, a range-wide African lion database would provide a solution to many of the current shortcomings that limit effective conservation decisions. The database is proudly hosted by the EWT's Conservation Science Unit on behalf of the broader conservation community. The ALD is financially supported by the Lion Recovery Fund and the National Geographic Society. Because we are hosting data that are owned by many different individuals and institutions from across the globe, much of the focus of our work for the first year of the project has been on building relationships with data holders and lion experts generally, in addition to developing robust data sharing agreements to document data that are shared within the database. We have set up database structures and established a system to support the data sharing process for multiple data providers. The challenging task of collecting population and distribution data is well underway, with more than 10,000 distribution points received and almost 500 population records included in the African Lion database. Our database will continue to grow beyond 2019, and we will soon develop an online platform.
The Drylands Conservation Program launched an e-learning centre in Loxton after identifying a great need in the community for access to online platforms. The centre is equipped with computers, a scanner and a printer and offers internet access. We work with many different sectors of the community, including school learners, the youth and emerging farmers. The grade 7 learners from the local school attend basic computer training courses conducted by volunteers. There are no computer facilities at the school, making the transition to high school difficult if students have no computer skills. We work closely with emerging farmers in the community. Targeted training focuses on the principles of sustainable land management, and the training is carried out in collaboration with organizations such as the National Wool Growers Association. Literacy was identified as a big challenge for some of the emerging farmers, several of whom attend adult literacy classes in the evenings at the centre. We conduct fun general skills development programs as well. Loxton's teenagers participated in a photography course designed to enhance their connection to nature through capturing environmental concerns in their neighbourhoods. Loxton's young adults seldom have access to tertiary education opportunities. The EWT facilitated an opportunity for 8 students to enrol with AgriCETA to complete their national certificates in animal production. The International Agricultural Academy for Africa is the training implementer. The students are part of farming families in Loxton. As such, they are important entry points for access to technological literacy for these families. We hosted a Google Earth training course for agricultural advisors from the Department of Land Reform and Rural Development, as well as the AgriCETA learners. This initiative was part of our Karoo Forever Sustainable Land Management project and ties in with the farm planning and management training courses we are running. The centre has opened the door to a world of information and knowledge not previously accessible to the community of this small rural town. Our conservation strategy strives to integrate the needs of people with those of conservation to enhance the impact and sustainability of our conservation actions. An essential part of this approach is to demonstrate the value of conservation to the communities where we work. The Drylands Conservation Program is about discovery, creativity, adventure, and pragmatic conservation action.
Just the word biodiversity gets different reactions from decision makers. Some understand and embrace it and what it means for their business, while others stare back with blank faces. In short, biodiversity is the living element of natural capital, and the reality is that business depends on and impacts biodiversity. They critically depend on ecosystems to produce goods and services. These dependencies range from raw material supply to crop pollination, water filtration, erosion control, and the list goes on. By identifying these biodiversity risks and opportunities, an organization can begin to make the business case for biodiversity.
Companies would not be able to operate without it. But biodiversity is under severe threat in South Africa and globally, and business is one of the primary drivers of its loss. A standardized method of measurement and disclosure is important to gain stakeholder trust and support. The National Biodiversity and Business Network, housed by the Endangered Wildlife Trust, is driving a project that houses a tool to address this gap, the Biological Diversity Protocol. This protocol has been developed in close collaboration with a number of partners as well as global consultation, and will enable any organization to identify, measure, manage, and report on biodiversity. We invite you to join us on this journey to better understand and report on biodiversity in your business.
Going to play on this one.
Suidpansberg is a mountain range which is 80 kilometers south of the Botswana-Zimbabwe border, right in the northern corner of South Africa. It is a mountain that is been identified by the South African Biodiversity Institute, our scientific authority, as a biodiversity hotspot and a center for endemism, which means that at all costs it should be conserved for future generations. The mountain currently have got very poor conservation status, with only 1% formally proclaimed as protected areas.
The aim of our project is to safeguard the future of hundreds of threatened and endemic species and landscapes and support the development of sustainable livelihoods in the Western Suidpansberg Mountains. We will achieve this through strategically addressing threats to species and their habitats across the region and establishing a formal protected area corridor across the mountain. We'll work with existing landowners and communities to establish one large protected area with the aim of saving species and habitats, providing critical ecosystem services such as clean water, developing climate change resilience, and building communities of conservation practice. Behind me is an example of one of the threats that we do face on the Suidpansberg, and that is the presence of invasive alien plants.
Most of the alien plants that we are eradicating, it absorbs a lot of water. For example, blue gum can absorb more than 500 liters per day. So by cutting them or eradicating them, it means we are doing a lot in water conservation.
So the Suidpansberg is a really unique mountain. It's very high in biodiversity. It's got very high levels of endemism. In fact, behind me you can see an example of an endemic aloe called the aloe angelica. Now these are only found on the northern facing slopes of the Suidpansberg. Our vision for the mountain is to create a large protected area so that we can protect all of these endemic and endangered species. We're working with a number of landowners as well as our own land purchasers. So we have our own property, Madiki, and we're expanding on this property. But we're working with landowners neighbouring that property under the Limpopo Department of Economic Development, Environment and Tourism's Biodiversity Stewardship Program. So because of the uniqueness of this mountain, its very high levels of endemism, many species that occur here, some of them threatened, the Suidpansberg has actually been identified in a number of different conservation initiatives, both in the National Protected Area Expansion Strategy as well as in the Limpopo Conservation Plan. It's identified as a critical biodiversity area. It's also been recognized as an important groundwater source area and as an important bird area by BirdLife South Africa. Despite all of this recognized attention of the Suidpansberg and its uniqueness, very little of the mountain is actually formally conserved. So that's why we're wanting to change this and to formally conserve it as a protected area.
Table Mountain is a very unique place. It's this rocky island, essentially, bordered on one side by concrete office blocks and frantic train stations, and hemmed in on the other side by the icy shores of the Atlantic Ocean, and just towers above a city and stands isolated and disconnected from its sandstone relatives, the Hottentot Holland Mountains to the east, by this vast dune system called the Cape Flats. And this ancient isolation has led to some incredibly unique flora and fauna that are endemic to the mountain. But a consequence of this isolation means that it's also very susceptible to change and to impact. And as the city continues to grow, and as human activity continues to increase, these unique species become threatened. The natural ecosystem is disrupted, particularly given the recent drought or the lack of water associated with it. The sensitive freshwater streams that meander down this mountain are particularly under strain. Thankfully, there are few people who are aware of the plight of these streams, and in the beginning of January 2019, a 3-year project funded by the Table Mountain Fund was established, dedicated specifically to improving the freshwater ecosystems on Table Mountain. It's a project that's headed by the EWT and ultimately with the specific aim of implementing long-term monitoring protocols to assess the trends in these streams and to establish baseline data on key target species that are completely endemic to this system, and ultimately to identify and implement conservation interventions to directly improve stream health. At the heart of this project is the critically endangered Table Mountain ghost frog. This is a species that kind of epitomizes the isolation of the mountain. It's restricted to just 6 perennial streams on Table Mountain. It occurs nowhere else in the whole world. It's disconnected from its immediate relatives by this coastal plain. The species has vanished from 2 of these streams in the last 30 years. Streams that have experienced severe human impacts, mostly in the form of alien plants and extensive path use and development. The remaining areas that it occurs in are facing similar threats. And despite these issues, almost nothing is known about the species. How long they live for, their habitat requirements, their life history, their population size. There's also very little adequate long-term monitoring of these perennial streams. And we think that filling this knowledge gap is absolutely crucial in ensuring the Table Mountain ghost frog survives into the future. These freshwater ecosystems are home to a variety of other endemic range-restricted species, such as the undescribed freshwater fish, the galaxias, as well as the possibly extinct dragonfly, called the elusive skimmer. There was also historically a population of Rose's mountain toadlet, a critically endangered amphibian, on Table Mountain. But over the last 50 years, this has also disappeared. It's really a challenge to fully understand the issues these freshwater systems face, and to correctly identify measures to address them. This project aims to provide a solid foundation based on research, upon which long-term applied conservation actions can be built, and to cultivate partnerships and synergies to coordinate and strengthen these actions. By understanding more about these complex systems, we can initiate long-term actions that will ensure their, and the unique species they support, survival for future generations to come, especially in light of climate change predictions and increased pressure on water usage.
Africa program, the Endangered Wildlife Trust, focuses primarily on the implementation of as many of the actions that are contained within the multi-species action plan for African Eurasian vultures that we were also involved in drafting and adopting back in 2016-17. Now in the last 12 months, most of our focus has gone towards expanding capacity within the Rangers Corps, with veterinarians, law enforcement staff across 9 countries in East and Southern Africa. We did some training in Kenya, Tanzania, and then most of the SADC countries at this stage. Some of our funding has been sourced from the US Fish and Wildlife Service, and they're looking at supporting us in terms of expanding training capacity across all of these countries so that we can develop a core of individuals that are skilled, knowledgeable in terms of wildlife poisoning and how to effectively address incidents when they take place in the field, but to also actively play a role in preventing these incidents from taking place by reducing the amount of pesticides out there, ensuring that control and legal control in terms of access to these pesticides are more stringently enforced, and then at the same time also working with teams in those countries beyond the training to also ascertain what the current population levels, for instance, of vultures are, what the movements are, and how these populations link to each other. And of course, we can then primarily focus our primary conservation work in these areas where work is most urgently needed. With the limited resources that we have at our disposal, we need to prioritize where we work. And through the information that we gather, with the work that we are doing, with the input from our partners, we are pretty certain that the areas that we do focus our work on are the most appropriate, and it's starting to show dividends in terms of the reduction in the prevalence of incidents in some cases, but then also significantly reducing the mortalities that occur when these incidents happen, because people now respond a lot quicker and they act appropriately, and therefore we have far less animals that are killed when incidents occur in many areas. But as we've seen with the incidents in Botswana, for instance, this year, where we've not done any training, is the need is far greater, and one cannot become complacent. The need is ever growing, and we need to make sure that whenever there are issues and there are emerging areas or emerging issues, that we have our finger on the pulse and that we start with positive intervention, working with partners in those countries.
Good day, my name is Matt Pretorius. I work for the Wildlife and Energy Program of the Endangered Wildlife Trust. Today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about bustards and power lines. Now, bustards are some of the heaviest flying birds in the world, and this affects their maneuverability, the way that they fly, and it really makes them vulnerable to collisions with power lines. Because of course, if they're big heavy birds, they can't avoid colliding with power lines. Now, there are ways to mitigate for this, and one of the traditional methods is to attach markers like this, which we call a flapper, onto the conductor cables or the shield or earth wires above the conductor cables. The earth wires are often implicated as the main culprits when it comes to collisions, because they're much thinner and far less visible to birds in flight. So the idea is to improve the visibility of the lines for birds in flight. So we tested these devices as well as spirals in the Karoo for over 8 years and found that unfortunately they had no effect on bustards. So this year we're revisiting the experiment and we're attaching some new devices, one of which is a LED enabled marker which works with UV lights, and it also has a little solar charger. Another marker type has a little phosphorescent strip on it, and so these two devices are both designed to improve visibility to birds flying during periods of low light. And then we have this as well, which is a very dynamic device that can turn in the wind and really move a lot in wind action. The markers will be placed on power lines early in 2020, and we hope to get some good results.
In Wildlife Trade Program, we work tirelessly to reduce trade-related threats that impact on the survival of wild animal and plants. We continuously explore innovation, approaching an opportunity to achieve this goal. We focus our initiative on 5 thematic areas: prevention, detection, justice, governance, and use. This video will highlight our work over the last years to ensure that the proper and responsible governance of South Africa wildlife is achieved and promoted. We are well on our way to meet our objective that by 2023, targeted initiatives are undertaken to support proper policy and government applied to at least 3 traded species. Over the last year, we submitted extensive comment on the legislation impact. Several traded species include rhino, elephant, lion. These comments include proper amendment to the alien and invasive species list, proposed amendment to the list of critical endangered, vulnerable and protected species, drafted regulation related to the domestic trade in rhinoceros horn, drafted notification prohibiting the carrying out of certain restricted activity involving rhinoceros horn, proposed amendment to the norms and standard for the making of rhino and rhino horn. We submitted extensive comments on CITES agenda item that the South Africa Management Authority should consider in preparation for CITES COP18, and we participated in CITES 2019 in Geneva. We also participate in meeting to form the 2019 Lion Bones Quota and Leopard Hunting Quota and submitted extensive comment following these meetings. Our environmental rights call on government to ensure the environmental is protected and present for future generations. These include the duty on governments to ensure conservation is promoted. The work undertaken in our government's thematic area support government in meeting this mandate and holds government to account where decisions are taken that do not meet this constitutional appreciative.
African countries are currently among the world's fastest growing economies, and this is reflected in expansion plans for both road and rail. Many of these plans are slated to occur in environmentally sensitive areas, and the Wildlife and Transport Programme is working to address these environmental challenges, one of the first African NGOs to do this. One of the ways we achieve this is through our strong belief in developing and supporting individuals and communities. Through empowering them with the necessary skills and knowledge, they will become our future ambassadors and champions of conservation. Starting at the grassroots level, in 2018 we delivered our first conservation and road safety campaign in schools project, which involved presenting road safety programs to school learners. We also expand our knowledge base in the field of road ecology through robust scientific research, working in partnership with universities. 2 of our students are undertaking research in Kruger National Park. Innocent Buthelezi is assessing the effectiveness of how different roadside signage can change driver behaviour, whilst Brilliant Masheo is gathering baseline roadkill data in the park. Similarly, Tabu Shashweo is gathering baseline data on amphibians in the Vembi Biosphere Reserve, an area rich in biodiversity and at threat from future development. And Sibini Sotela, our final student who graduated this year, observed driver behaviour towards a fake rubber snake that he had positioned on the road, finding that almost 20% of drivers deliberately drove over his fake snake. Working closely with stakeholders in the transport sector is integral to our work. Currently we work with 3 of South Africa's toll concessionaire companies, providing training to route patrol staff. Together, we aim to address a reduction in wildlife vehicle collisions, as well as the impact of these collisions on human safety. From school learners to university students and to stakeholders in the transport sector, we are all making a difference on our country's roads.